So it's early July here at the Liscombe rewilding site in Dorset. Just wanted to say a little bit about active versus passive rewilding and how we're kind of blending the two approaches here at Liscombe. So I kind of interpret the distinction between those two approaches, which is quite fuzzy. Passive rewilding, where basically you could have a site like this where you acquire it, secure it, and simply stand back and let nature take over, colonise purely of its own, under its own steam, but only colonise from the local species pool, which is already very depleted. So the local species pool has been depleted by human action, basically. So there are no turtle doves here, there are no red-backed shrikes, there's no aurochs because they're globally extinct, no European wild horse because it's globally extinct, no wild boar because we won't allow them back into the landscape for some reason. Real blind spot for the conservation community, wild boar. We need a species recovery plan for wild boar in Britain. So we've got a depleted regional or local species pool which limits, and that's an anthropogenic problem. So the species pool is depleted by human activity, human actions, which limits to some extent the species that can actually recolonise under its own steam. So it's not self-willed. There's quite a popular phrase amongst some rewilding commentators, self-willed, which kind of implies you stand back and allow nature to reassemble itself. But it's not self-willed to the extent that we've taken out lynx, European wild horse. There's a lot of species that can't recolonise, and that's where kind of active rewilding comes in. Well, that's one aspect of active rewilding, is putting missing species back. Another aspect of active rewilding is addressing obvious kind of structural and functional issues. So, for instance, just down there in the valley, by the chapel at Liscombe, there's a section of stream that was put under a concrete farmyard. So the stream flows down, hits the farmyard, it goes underground in concrete in a culvert and then comes out again. It's only about 100 yards, 100 metres. But a form of active rewilding down there would obviously be to break out the concrete and to kind of daylight that little section of stream. Now, a passive rewilding project would probably do the same thing. That's one piece of activity it would want to do. Another example of kind of structural active rewilding concerns the loss of or the smoothness of fields like this. So this was arable. It's been arable for an awful long time, and it's been smoothed out by the plough. So we're on open downland, we're on the chalk, so it would naturally be undulating and a fairly gentle landscape. But it would also, at a more micro level, it would have been a lot less smooth than it is now, and the smoothness is not good from a species community reassembly point of view. So to have a more natural kind of diversity of species reassembling themselves and communities developing, communities of plants and animals, you really want to put the wrinkles back in that have been smoothed out by the plough. So an obvious structural intervention that's common in active rewilding would be to scrape off areas of soil, topsoil, to reveal bare chalk in this case, and build up some mounds, just basically to rebuild the undulations. So there's kind of some distinguishing features there. So passive rewilding, you really do just step back and let nature reassemble itself. Active rewilding, you address some of the anthropogenic constraints that confront nature and reduce the extent to which it can recover under its own steam. Now, daylighting a stream is a non-controversial aspect of active rewilding. Anyone would say that's a good thing to do. Scraping off topsoil and building little mounds to reinstate undulations that have been ploughed out by arable cultivation. That's probably a slightly more controversial intervention within the rewilding space. It's quite common in conservation, in conventional habitat creation circles, where you'd scrape off areas and reveal bare soil, bare subsoil, chalky subsoil. That's quite a frequent thing you would see on nature reserves under conventional habitat management. It's not so much a rewilding practice. It's what we're going to be doing here. And another thing that we'll be doing here is overcoming the constraints on dispersal. So dispersal limitation, anthropogenic, human-induced, human-imposed dispersal limitation that wildflowers face. So the herbaceous flowering plants. It's probably less of a severe issue here because we have SSSI, what we'd conventionally call chalk grass on the steeper slopes, and that is jam-packed with the kind of wildflowers, the herbaceous species you would expect in a landscape like this under more natural circumstances. So there's less of a dispersal limitation problem here than there would be on say a rewilding site that's just arable with no, or just improved grasslands and arable with no SNCI, SSSI, species-rich relics of old habitat present. But here, so one kind of active intervention we might undertake is seeding small areas, so collecting green hay and brush harvested seed from within the more species-rich areas, not the SSSI, but maybe the SNCI and other species-rich areas that are not designated or not recognised. Lovely to hear old it's corn bunting and yellowhammer I can hear. No cell bunting, unfortunately. Give it time. Yes, we've got source populations on the site of those kind of herbaceous wildflower species. We can harvest from those and we can inoculate small areas. Now that's the anthropogenic constraint we're overcoming there is the fact that there are no aurochs, wild horse, wild boar. The seed dispersal agents, or a lot of wildflower seed is dispersed by mammals, by animals. Some are dispersed by wind, like knapweed. Black knapweed is going to be a wind dispersed species. Others are not going to be. But you can harvest wildflower seed and inoculate small areas, and that just gets over that anthropogenic constraint imposed by us removing aurochs from the landscape. Nice dip here. Was that an old dew pond? One wonders. So this is another obvious intervention in this active rewilding project is harvesting the hay here. Unfertilised, this is lay grassland, unfertilised, taking a hay crop several times during the summer, over several summers, just to take out the nutrients, try and get it right down to zero value in terms of the kind of a nutrient index value. Obviously the wildflower element, the herbaceous wildflower element, prefers infertile soil. The grasses prefer fertile soils, some of them do. So what we're trying to achieve here is to bring the soil chemistry back down to a more natural situation. If you don't do that early on, you're kind of locked into a grass-dominated species poor sward within your rewilding project. So here we will do that, or we are doing that. Going to harvest hay crops over the summer for the next few years, just to soak up and remove those nutrients. And that will open up the grass sward, create lots of bare ground, and the wildflowers can colonise. Some will be in the seed bank, some will arrive because they're wind dispersed, some will arrive because they're mammal dispersed, others will be brought in by us because their dispersal agents are absent or very low density, and hopefully the herbaceous component will colonise soon. This is very open-ended though, so we're not saying this will therefore be chalk grassland. We're saying that under more natural circumstances, the things that will have colonised this kind of landscape early on would have been herbaceous annuals and perennials, and they're not going to, because we've removed the dispersal agents, and we're going to therefore stick them back. But beyond that, it's open-ended. The habitat will develop as it wants to develop. So, you know, you can foresee a active rewilding phase of the first 3-4 years, maybe shorter, maybe slightly longer, depending on the issues you're resolving. And beyond that, though, you know, you're not saying this will be a particular habitat type. It's open-ended once you've addressed anthropogenic constraints on nature reassembly. What can we hear? So several whitethroats, corn bunting and yellowhammer. I can hear some goldfinches having a good year again. Obviously no red-backed shrike in the hedgerows, unfortunately. I say hedgerows, these are not going to be hedgerows in the long term. These are our source populations of shrubs and trees. Hazel, bramble, blackthorn, hawthorn, spindle, wayfaring tree. They're the source populations of seeds and suckers and whatever else of those are going to gradually spread out. Some of them are going to sucker, like the blackthorn, just spread out from and the hawthorn as well to some extent, spread out from the margins. Others are going to be dispersed by winter redwings, or redwings when they arrive in the autumn. And obviously the resident blackbirds and song thrushes. Great seed dispersers. You don't really need to do kind of active intervention for the woody component, arguably. But here I think what we will do is brash piles. So any cut woody vegetation will be dragged into the middle of these fields, piled up. And they're kind of locus for recolonisation, or loci for recolonisation of those woody species, because with any luck the birds will sit on those brash piles and poop out the seed of hawthorn and wild rose and whatever else. That'll just help to create islands of shrubby, woody vegetation that will then be source populations for wider spread. What a beautiful day. Now, I'm in favour of both active and passive rewilding. There's a heck of a lot of passive rewilding going on across Europe, inadvertently because of land, I won't say abandonment, I'll say withdrawal of farming from certain landscapes, particularly higher altitude. Now that is passive rewilding, not deliberate. There's a lot of that going on. There's less active rewilding. So probably the most controversial aspect of active rewilding is the surrogates for missing species or globally extinct species. So surrogates such as, in this case, longhorn cattle to kind of replace the aurochs, which we can't introduce because they're globally extinct. And conics or exmoors in place of European wild horse because they're globally extinct. Lovely goldfinch singing away in this little shelter belt. So that's controversial. We're going to have them here. We've already got both longhorns and conics on the triple SI components of the site. Because one urgent priority here, it's a lovely herd over on the hill line over there, on the chalk grass and kind of face of the amphitheatre. So because it's a site of special scientific interest, a SSSI, that bowl, or the steep ground around it, we have conservation obligations which will require conventional habitat management, at least in the early years. So that's why the longhorns are over there. An early priority was to fence the triple SI parts of the site so we could get grazing animals on there. But they are our aurochs replacements, and the conics are obviously our European wild horse replacements. Very controversial aspect of rewilding. but I think it's an absolutely legitimate one. So the Triple is fenced into several units, so we can control the grazing intensity there as much as we need to. Lovely goldfinch, really loud. Hold on, let's control the gimbal if I can. That's better. Young buzzard calling as well. Had a red kite and buzzard over one of the cut fields earlier. It's quite an interesting discussion on LinkedIn. A lady posted a photo of a willow that had been, only a small willow, that had been felled by a passing beaver, presumably to get to the succulent shoots. And the willow was re-sprouting, but the lady said, this poor willow, the only one along this riverbank, and it was, been cleared by humans, the rest of the trees, but she lamented that this passing beaver had needlessly destroyed, she wrote, this willow tree, and we must be much more thoughtful before reintroducing species if there isn't the habitat to support them. Well, yes, that's the first precaution of intelligent species reintroductions, is to make sure there's the habitat available to them. But that willow tree had not been destroyed, as she wrote. That willow was already sprouting. It had several inches just this spring, several inches of new shoots coming. And willow is supremely well adapted to coppicing. That is in its evolutionary history, is basically that interaction with coppicing beavers. And obviously humans have taken over, and we now pollard and coppice willows. And the species thrives under coppicing and pollarding by humans, and it thrives under coppicing by beavers. So to suggest that it had been destroyed when it was clearly sprouting and it's clearly supremely well adapted to being coppiced by beavers is just silly. There's a lot of ecological kind of ignorance. That may sound a bit harsh, but that's what it is, floating around. Nature lovers often really don't understand nature. It may sound a bit harsh, may sound a bit mean, but that tree was not destroyed. And the other, she was kind of doubling down. Everyone was saying, no, you're wrong. But she was saying, well, clearly large parts of Scotland are no good for beavers, therefore we shouldn't reintroduce beavers. That's completely wrong. That implies that 100% of Scottish rivers must be suitable before bringing back beavers, which is never going to happen, obviously, so it's played in the hands of the nature depleting fraternity, which is mostly humanity, to suggest that everything has to be perfect before you can bring a species back. Beavers, we wouldn't expect beavers to live in every square, not inch, but every kilometre of riverine riparian habitat will not be suitable for beavers. That's fair enough, but loads of it is. And beavers have a legitimate place in the Scottish countryside and the English and the British countryside, even though not every kilometre of riverine habitat is currently suitable for them. It's an impossible target to achieve 100% suitability before you bring a species back. What you do need to do is to make sure that the factors driving the decline of a species are no longer operating, or you've addressed them, such that the species will be viable and self-sustaining if you reintroduce them. What's that there just flown up? It is a goldfinch. Surprise, surprise. So yeah, no species reintroduction project would aspire for 100% of the land area to be suitable, but it would aspire, or not aspire, it would make sure that the factors driving the declines have been addressed such that a viable population, self-sustaining population, hopefully an increasing population that can recolonise the wider environment, is there and in place. You don't want to introduce a species that cannot sustain itself because their habitat is unsuitable. But equally, you don't need 100% of Scotland, say, to be suitable for beavers before bringing back beavers. It's all moot anyway because there are loads of beavers in Scotland, and yes, they do coppice willows and the willows sprout back, and all is good from that perspective. So it's a very poor reason to criticise beaver reintroduction. Where are we now? You can see this hasn't been cut. You can see one of the good reasons for cutting slightly nutrient enriched grassland as part of your rewilding project. Now this is great for small mammals, hunting owls, kestrels, that kind of stuff. But it is species poor, and it shouldn't be species poor under natural circumstances. This will be full of wildflowers, and it's going to remain species poor for quite a while because this is a formidable barrier to the recolonisation of herbaceous wildflowers, these grasses. So passive rewilding project, yes. Over decades you'd get shrublands recolonising, and gradually some wildflowers recolonise. But it wouldn't be a trajectory that it would be under more natural circumstances. So here you could take a hay crop for the first 2, 3, 4 years until you've depleted the nutrients enough, and then you do some scraping off of topsoil to reveal chalky bedrock and create some mounds and put the wrinkles back in, because this has all been ploughed in the past. And that way you create some regeneration niches, you know, some bare ground, some disturbed soil for the wildflowers to recolonise. Otherwise it's got to get into this thatch, and it's just not going to happen for decades, if at all. What a lovely view. There's Liscombe Bowl. There's a little herd of aurochs centre of the frame now. Probably can't see them because they're a long way away. Let's zoom in a bit. Still too distant to see, I think. But they're there. Nice herd of longhorn cattle, aka aurochs, eating down the biomass as aurochs would have done before we drove them to global extinction. Tell me what you think about my kind of clunky attempt to distinguish between active and passive rewilding. This is very much an active rewilding project here at Liscombe in Dorset. What a beautiful day. Ah, lovely field maple just here. It's a campestry with a holly underneath, that's nice to see. Hawthorn, some ash there, elder, ivy, corylus, hazel, blackthorn, wild rose, more holly. Can't wait to see how this looks as these things start to spread out, especially the blackthorn will start quite quickly to sucker out. The fencing here needs to be removed. So the idea here is you've got the triple SI kind of ring fencing, just so we can control grazing on the triple SI initially, but then there'll be a much bigger grazing unit, so a ring fence, I think, into 2 much bigger grazing units, 335 hectares, and those cattle that are currently confined within the triple SI will graze across the whole site. So they'll bring seed from the triple SI out into the wider landscape, and we'll remove all of these internal fencing. We want as little fencing as you can possibly have on this site, so none of these hedgerows will be fenced. And these hedgerows are basically not hedgerows anymore. They're not going to be treated as hedgerows, they're going to be treated as seed sources. You may even punch the odd hole in them to allow the animals, the large grazers, to move between fields that are a bit isolated. We are now coming down. Oh, there's a big dragonfly there, hunting. So we're coming down towards a part of a triple SI unit. Let's see how it looks in a second when we go through the fence. This sward is very long, it's about almost a metre tall, which suggests to me it's quite nutrient rich. There's no wildflowers in it, quite a few meadow browns, but you would expect that in this kind of grassy habitat. You'd expect loads of marbled whites as well, but I've not seen one today. So this is the triple SI fence line. So ultimately, once we've got the ring fencing done around the whole site, these gates will be opened so the longhorns will not then be confined to the triple SI. But if we need to have some targeted grazing of the triple SI, we can just herd them back in and shut the gates. But my guess is we won't need to do that because they'll range across the whole site and this will have enough grazing to meet the conservation objectives for the triple SI. Looking pretty good. This is only going to get better now going forward. Might up the resolution to 4K, I think. Head back this way towards the chapel, I think. The temperature today is perfect, having been just through a heat wave. It's blooming unbearable on here during the heat wave. It's now lovely and cool. We are in the midst of a pretty vicious drought though. Not had rain in ages. Luckily it doesn't look too desiccated, so if we can just have a bit more rain, a few more nighttime showery rain conditions, not torrential rain, just showers, that would be nice.